subscribe to our channel and hit the bell icon so that you know when live we go. Hello and welcome to Daily News Simplified. In the next 30 minutes, we'll have a discussion on today's newspaper, The Hindu, from civil service examination perspective. Topics that we are going to take up for discussion has been tabulated on your screen. The time stamping for the same has been given in the description section. There is a news on page number 1 with the title 3 NGOs linked to Congress under Home Ministry scanner. The Ministry of Home Affairs has constituted an inter-ministerial committee headed by senior officials of Enforcement Directorate to investigate into violation of various legal provisions of Prevention of Money Laundering Act, Income Tax Act, Foreign Contribution Regulation Act, etc. by 3 trusts which are linked to Indian National Congress Party. We'll not get into the politics of this, but we will discuss these 2 important legislations which are important from exam perspective. One is Money Laundering Act and the other Foreign Contribution Regulation Act. Prevention of Money Laundering Act was enacted in 2002. It defines money laundering. Money laundering has been mentioned in the syllabus of GS paper 3 under internal security. So it's an important topic and this particular act is important for the prelims exam as well. The act defines money laundering as any process or activity carried out by any person connected with the process of crime, including its concealment, possession, acquisition, use, and projecting or claiming it as untainted property, shall be guilty of offense of money laundering. Money laundering, basically in simple terms, is the process of making large amounts of money generated by criminal activity appear to have come from legitimate source. There are many criminal activities like illegal arms sales, smuggling, drug trafficking, prostitution rings, insider trading, bribery, computer fraud, etc., which generates large amount of profit. But people can't use this money. For example, they can't buy a car or they can't go on a foreign trip because income tax officials may barge into your house and ask you to account for this money. So you have to find some way to show this tainted money as untainted. So maybe you open up a shop and you show inflated sale from that shop. So you show that you are earning legally and you are pumping in from the back channel illegal money into it. Or maybe you are investing in the film industry and you're claiming that a film has earned 100 crore when actually it has not. So that is also another way of pumping in illegal money and showing that as untainted one. Under Prevention of Money Laundering Act, Enforcement Directorate is empowered to conduct money laundering investigation. And recently the power of Enforcement Directorate has been enlarged. Last year, Union Government has issued a notification on certain changes in the Prevention of Money Laundering Act. And the most important change that they have made is to enlarge the power of Enforcement Directorate. Previously, there was requirement of FIR or charge sheet before ED can take over the investigation process. But now ED is empowered to arrest an accused without a warrant. Now let us come to Foreign Contribution Regulation Act 1976 and the successive amendments that have been done to this legislation. It was enacted during the time of emergency in 1976. The purpose was to regulate the acceptance, utilization and accounting of foreign contribution by a person, association or any NGOs. NGOs are also included in this legislation. It prohibits acceptance of any foreign contribution from a foreign source by a candidate for election, a correspondent, columnist, cartoonist, editor, owner, printer or publisher of a registered newspaper, a judge, government servant, or any employee of a corporation. Also, members of the legislature are barred from getting foreign contribution. Political party or the office bearers of the political parties, they are also barred from getting any foreign contribution from any foreign source. The Act also defines what's a foreign source. Foreign source would include government of any foreign country, any international agency, but that will not include UN and its specialized agencies or World Bank or IMF or any other international agencies or intergovernmental agencies. Foreign source will also include foreign company, including subsidiaries of foreign company. A corporation incorporated in a foreign company will also be the part of foreign source. Even companies under Companies Act 1956, if 50% of the nominal value of the share was held singly or jointly by foreign sources, those Indian companies will also be considered as foreign source. Foreign source will also include trade union in any foreign country, a foreign trust, a society, club, or any other association of individuals formed or registered outside India. Everything, even citizen of a foreign country, they all are foreign sources according to the original Act, Foreign Contribution Regulation Act 1976. But in 2006, government enacted Foreign Contribution Regulation Bill, which became an act in 2010. This new act enlarged the list of the group prohibited from foreign contribution. So now the prohibited category will also include any organization of a political nature. Note this, and any association or company engaged in the production and broadcast of audio or audiovisual news or current affairs program. This addition was crucial. And now if the government wants to ban any NGO or trust or any corporation, all it has to do is to prove that this organization is of political nature. In 2016, government introduced a Finance Act, and Finance Act 2016 amended the Foreign Contribution Regulation Act 2010, having retrospective effect from 28 September 2010. Actually, the deal was both the leading political party, the BJP and the Congress, was caught on the wrong side. They were caught by the Delhi High Court having contribution from foreign sources. So, they changed the law. The changes allowed foreign origin companies to finance non-governmental organizations. And the changes also cleared the way for donations to political parties by changing the definition of foreign companies. Now the Indian companies in which the foreign shareholding is more than 50% are not foreign sources for the purpose of FCRA Act. Then in 2018, Finance Act 2018 amended the Finance Act 2016 and extended the retrospective cover provided to Indian companies having more than 50% of foreign holding from earlier 28 September 2010 to now 5th of August 1976. So basically now all the political parties for all that funding of this kind will be absolved. And any contribution made by any Indian company having more than 50% foreign holding will be exempted from FCRA scrutiny from 5th August 1976. In this regard, you must also know there has been a ruling by the Supreme Court recently. Supreme Court gave a ruling on branding an organization as political to prevent their foreign funding. As we have talked about, now the government just have to prove that an organization, an NGO or a trust or a corporation is having a political nature of its activity. And then that can be debarred from FCRA Act if the government wishes to do so. Supreme Court has held that central government cannot brand an organization as political to deprive it from receiving foreign funds under Foreign Contribution Regulation Act 2010 for legitimate forms of dissent to aid a public cause. Now, whether that is a public cause or not, again, that is a matter of interpretation. And government will have its own interpretation for enforcing FCRA Act. All the cases, case by case, cannot go to the Supreme Court. So, still after the judgment, there are grey areas and it's the prerogative of the executive. There are two articles on page number 6 and central theme for both of them are the same. So we will have one common combined discussion for both of them. The first article, the social contract needs to be rewritten, raises two important questions. It asks the reader, is the pandemic's impact the result of the failure of individual governments, or it is due to the failure of the power relation between the government and the governed? Effectively, these two questions are, the adverse impact of COVID-19 pandemic is because of lack of benevolence and discipline in the ruler, or because of the poor social contract structure prevailing in the world. And then the article goes on to discuss in detail the social contract theories. The relevance of the discussion that we are going to have in this section will be more for GS paper 4 and essay paper. The article says that mankind in the course of evolution formed a concept of social groups, and framed certain rules that they all will abide by. This idea has been very well encapsulated in Immanuel Kant's ideas of governance. Although Immanuel Kant came very late in 18th century, but he described this idea very well, so I am using his work. Immanuel Kant has written in his work Perpetual Peace, a Philosophical Sketch. He says, the state of peace is not the state of nature, which is rather a state of war. So must the state of peace is established. Meaning naturally the state of peace will not be established, you'll have to make some effort to make it happen. Formally, this concept started to be developed by Thomas Hobbes. And Thomas Hobbes was the first propounder of social contract theory. Hobbes in his book, The Leviathan. Leviathan is a creature with the form of a sea serpent in the Hebrew Bible. It is a symbol of God's power of creation. Thomas Hobbes used this symbol and he tried to relate it with the sovereign authority, the kings, and represent the kings as the representatives of gods. Thomas Hobbes in The Leviathan says that man has this perpetual and restless desire for power, and this ends only with his death. During his existence on earth, it can only be controlled by king through use of punishment. As per Thomas Hobbes, when human beings are created because of this desire, there is a state of nature. In this state, each person would have a right or license to do anything and everything he or she wishes. Hobbes argues that this would lead to a war of all against all. So in order to avoid it, people agree to a social contract and establish a civil society. The process of establishment of the social contract and civil society is like this. First, people agree to establish society by collectively renouncing the rights they had in the state of nature, in an uncontrolled, free, unbridled society. Second, they agree to confer upon one or more among themselves who will now be considered as the sovereign, the authority and power to enforce this social contract. So, as per Thomas Hobbes, a civil society is a population beneath a sovereign authority, to whom all individuals in that society unconditionally have surrendered some rights for the sake of protection of the remaining rights. And any power exercised by this authority cannot be resisted, because the sovereign power is derived from individuals surrendering their rights. And hence, there is no freedom in the civil society. You have to follow the orders of the sovereign power. This is the concept of social contract of Thomas Hobbes. And you would be aware of it already if you have covered this section in your GS paper 4. Rousseau, however, criticized the social contract theory of Thomas Hobbes. According to Rousseau, sovereign is there to protect the liberty of the citizen. What is right and what is wrong will have to be decided by the emotion and conscience of people and not by the whims and fancies of the sovereign power. You must have heard this famous quotation by Rousseau, man is born free, but is everywhere in chain. Freedom is central in the social contract concept of Rousseau. Rousseau was very much concerned with liberty. Hobbes' social contract takes away the freedom of man from him. But in the Rousseau's concept of social contract, government should be responsible to the people and must supply freedom and happiness. So in the Thomas Hobbes social contract, the power was tilted towards the sovereign. Rousseau tried to correct this power and gave equal right to people as well in deciding what is right and what is wrong. John Locke added further layers in the social contract and he tilted the balance towards people. John Locke added the concept of natural right to the social contract. He said the state is there to protect the natural rights of citizens. All legitimate social authority needs people's legitimacy. John Locke gave three natural rights: right to life, right to liberty, and right to property. And all these three natural rights were taken up by US Constitution when it was framed. By now it must be clear to you, and the article also highlights that there is a difference, stark difference in the social contract theory of Thomas Hobbes and Rousseau. While Hobbes believed that man in nature was solitary, nasty, and brutish, for Rousseau, man in nature was born free. And this freedom must continue even after the social contract is imposed. Now let's come to the present time. Present governments also use social contract theory to claim legitimacy for their actions, but they rely more on the theory expounded by Thomas Hobbes as compared to Rousseau or John Locke. Thomas Hobbes, as we have already discussed, argued that once a ruler is chosen, citizens lose all their rights except those that the ruler will feel important to grant. While no government will explicitly say that this is the position of their social contract concept, but it is the assumption in every rule and diktat which is issued by the executive. The governments use the power democratically invested in them to decide what is the best interest of people. But as per the Rousseau social contract, it is the people who have to decide the best interest of themselves. So, there is a bending of individual free will towards the collective will. The concept of social contract came because of existence of a collective will. But this collective will is now suppressed by the will of few individuals. The concept that we have seen, actually you study this in the governance portion of ethics paper, and very effectively you can use it in the essay paper as well. The article says that the concept of social contract, assuming which the government across the world functions, get exposed even more at the time of crisis. After having seen the concept of social contract of Hobbes, Rousseau and John Locke, let us see if that is being applied by government across the world. During the time of COVID-19 pandemic, the world has voluntarily surrendered their individual rights to the government, who had to exercise these powers with discipline and benevolence under the social contract. And people have been following all sort of directives and diktats given by their government concerning lockdown, social distancing, travel norms, etc. etc. In the time of the crisis, people looked to the state, the sovereign power, for guidance and taking them to safety. The sovereign had to protect all. But however, the brunt of the pandemic has come down to the poorest of people, the voiceless millions. The article argues that somehow we are managing, we wear the mask and continue our business, but the poorest of all who live in slums, they cannot follow the social distancing norms. That is an abstract concept for them. So everyone who are part of the social contract are not being protected by the sovereign. That is the violation even of the social contract concept of Thomas Hobbes. If we come to Rousseau, Rousseau talked about freedom. Freedom is central and freedom of people have to be protected. According to Professor H.L.A. Hart, the leading legal philosopher of Britain, which the author has quoted in the article, he once said, freedom can be valueless to the victims of unrestricted competition. They are too poor to make use of it. So it will be pedantic to point out to them that though starving, they are free. This freedom means nothing. This freedom does not bring happiness as Rousseau talked about in the social contract. Taking examples of migrant laborers, the authors in the article have argued that government take care of only those who have voice, and society as a whole is blind towards others. So there are two problems here. One is the over-centralization of power in the sovereign authority, and second is the insensitiveness in the functioning of sovereign authority. The author says, when the source of power in an unequal society is centralized, the response to the crisis will result in unequal relief to different strata of society. The response will be tilted towards those who have greater voice. So, the more unequal the society, the more decentralized the response should be. The author further says that the social contract which allows centralized sovereign with overarching powers have clearly failed on this occasion and will continue to fail every time similar challenge springs up. The centralized sovereign will work well against a mighty external aggressor, but will not work against a microscopic pathogen. COVID-19 pandemic can only be defeated by empowered populace, by empowered local institutions. So there is problem of absence of decentralization. In the beginning, you will remember the Ministry of Home Affairs used to lay down all the norms of lockdown and social distancing. Later, the state government were allowed to frame their own rules and regulations. So centralization in this kind of pandemic will not definitely work. But the problem is not only of decentralization, the problem is also of sensitivity with which the government functions. We are blind towards the voiceless. And because of this, the author says, and now the title of the article is justified, the social contract needs to be rewritten. To highlight the insensitivities and the blindness, now let's get into the second article on page number 6. The title is The Pandemic is About Eyes Shut. In the introduction to the article, the author has mentioned a novel, Blindness, by Portuguese Nobel laureate José Saramago. The novel Blindness of José Saramago revolves around a mysterious epidemic because of which people suddenly start to turn blind. You can use this part of the article as a very good introduction to your essays. The novel Blindness starts with a person driving his car who turns blind while waiting at a traffic signal. He pleads to be taken home, and a man, on the pretext of helping, takes him home but soon after runs away with his car. The epidemic spreads rapidly, and all those affected by it are quarantined in an asylum. The novel focuses on 7 characters, but these characters have no names, but only descriptions, like the doctor, the doctor's wife, the girl with the dark glasses, etc. The lack of equitable delivery of food, inhospitable and unhygienic living conditions, police brutality, and apathy of the sovereign leads to panic among the blind. They are at the brink of starvation. So these 7 blind characters escape the asylum and enter the city where they have come from, only to find that everybody in the city now have become blind. Lacking any support, the country plunges into utter despair. But since it was a fiction, here there was resurrection of the city quite magically. But we are in reality, and no magic is going to happen here. So it's going to take a long time before the affairs for us gets resurrected. However, the author draws a parallel among the people in the city who got blind and us. We too are blind, but in a different way. We are blind towards the voiceless. We are blind towards the victim of the epidemic. For instance, the author says we don't even know the number of migrant laborers. The Chief Labour Commissioner stated that there are 26 lakh migrants, but the economic survey puts the number to 8 crore. The anonymity of workers have been further reinforced as government has not kept any record as to who they are and where they are working. There is no accountability of contractors and subcontractors also. So they can be hired and fired whenever they want. So the migrant workers, like the characters in the novel Blindness, have been rendered nameless. We are also blind towards their hunger and death. Recently you must have heard the statement by various ministers and ministries that there has been no death out of hunger. And the deaths are only on the count of COVID-19. But the ground reporting have stated otherwise. There were also reports coming that 10 crore people have been rendered ineligible from the National Food Security Act because the government presently is following 2011 census data. And this underestimates the National Food Security Act coverage. But to be fair, government has come up with other schemes to supply food to the needy without the need of the ration card. Regarding blindness, the author also highlights that 2 petitions concerning food and income support to migrants were dismissed by the Supreme Court of India during lockdown. But the court finally took the suo motu cognizance of the crisis, but that happened only after 20 senior lawyers wrote a letter to the Chief Justice of India to intervene. The entire issue can be summarized from the findings of Stranded Workers Action Network report. It says, while a part of the government's slow response is due to the lack of empathy towards workers, a part is also the result of inefficiencies resulting from unilateral decision making. So it's both insensitiveness and centralization. Unlike Saramago's fictional world, any systemic and structural blindness has no magical cure. The cure will take time, and the cure will come only through sensitivity and decentralized steps that ensures empowerment of common people of local institutions. This has to be incorporated in the social contract, and the social contract needs to be renegotiated for this very reason. Now let us do 5 small news from the newspaper which are important from the prelims perspective. The first news we'll take up is US has formally started withdrawal from WHO funding. In this regard, you must know there are two important sources for WHO funding. One is the assessed contributions by the member states as a factor of country's GDP. By the virtue of being the member of WHO, a country has to give some contribution to WHO funding. The larger the size of the GDP, the more contribution has to come. There is no fixed formula as such, but the contribution of a nation has to be proportional to its GDP. That is why the contribution from United States is the highest. But this mode of contribution accounts for only 20% of WHO's budget. The rest comes from voluntary contribution by member states, private sector, NGOs, philanthropic organizations, etc. In the wake of COVID-19 pandemic, in May 2020, the WHO Foundation was launched. Although this was launched by WHO itself, but this is a separate legal entity from WHO. And the purpose was to facilitate contribution from general public who were not contributing to WHO directly, and also philanthropic donors and corporate partners. The second news is UAE is keen to sign Open Skies Treaty with India. In this regard, you must know the Open Skies Treaty agreement means that the two countries will allow unlimited flights to fly between them. So it helps to increase the connectivity between the two countries. But the National Civil Aviation Policy 2016 provide for Open Skies Treaty with SAARC countries and countries beyond 5,000 kilometer radius from India. This is important for the prelims exam. For the rest of the countries, India has to sign one-on-one bilateral air service agreement. This kind of bilateral agreement India has with many countries like US, Japan, Australia, Jamaica and others. There is a similar term called as Open Skies Treaty. Don't confuse this with Open Skies Agreement. Open Skies Treaty is different from Open Skies Agreement. Basically, this was an armed control mechanism signed in the post-Cold War era. The purpose was to allow the signatories of the treaty to fly unarmed aircrafts to spy on any part of other member countries. Basically, this was a confidence-building exercise in the post-Cold War era. You just have to remember that India is not party to this. There is a news regarding rental housing scheme which has been cleared by the cabinet, and this scheme is a sub-scheme under Pradhan Mantri Awas Yojana. Pradhan Mantri Awas Yojana has a goal of housing for all by 2022. Under the rental housing scheme, actually the government housing complexes will be converted into affordable rental housing complexes. This will be done in PPP mode. Rental housing scheme is mainly targeting the migrant workers in the urban areas. The detail of the scheme will come up in coming days in the newspaper since it has just recently been cleared. You have to keep an eye on this because this is related to migrant workers, and migrant workers are very important for the coming mains exam. You just have to remember Operation Samudra Setu was conducted to bring back to India Indians stranded in other countries. For example, Maldives, Sri Lanka, Iran. That's it. The fifth and the final news for the prelims that we are going to see is this. WHO has declared Sri Lanka and Maldives measles and rubella free. Measles is a viral infection. It is not bacterial, not fungal. It's a viral infection, and it is the infection of respiratory system. It is highly contagious and many of us must have already suffered from it. The fluid released from the body of the infected person when he or she cough or sneeze becomes the source of infection for others. If you had measles, you will definitely know that one of the symptoms is widespread skin rash. Vitamin A deficiency is considered to be a risk factor for measles. The reason for this has not been understood very well. The milder infection of measles is called as rubella. It is also called as German measles. Symptoms are almost the same, but the intensity is less in rubella, and it infects mostly children and young adults. The fourth round of National Family Health Survey has assessed that the vaccination coverage for measles is less. In India, it is around 81%. But as per WHO, 95% coverage level is required for elimination of measles. So the Ministry of Health and Family Welfare has initiated measles rubella vaccination campaign, and it's targeting children from 9 months up to 15 years. And measles rubella vaccine has also become part of routine immunization program. It is part of Mission Indradhanush. If I ask you all the vaccination given under Mission Indradhanush, the answer should come out of you free flowing. With this, we have come to the end of the discussion. Let's take up question for the day. Yesterday's question was S-400 missile defense system, sometimes in news, has been developed by which of the following? It has been developed by Russia, and this has been very prominently in news. Today's question is, consider the following with respect to the recently established WHO Foundation. Statement 1. Funding for WHO Foundation can be sourced even from general public. Statement 2. WHO Foundation is legally independent from WHO. Which of the above statements are correct? 1 only, 2 only, both 1 and 2, neither 1 nor 2. With this, we have come to the end of the DNS session for today. Thank you for listening to me. Have a good evening.